Hello, welcome back to my channel. My name is Melanie Tana, and I love stories and talking about them. Today I'm going to be talking about the first two books in a series that I wish I had read when they first came out. At the request of my sister, I started reading the Lunar Chronicles by Marissa Meyer, and I am really enjoying these books. As many of you know, I love to talk about what I learned from books and not so much give a review for them because I have a hard time knowing what to say in a review. I think, it's just tricky. So I want to make a quick video and talk about some of the things that I've learned after reading books 1 and 2, Cinder and Scarlet. And I won't be giving spoilers for said books, but you'll kind of get an idea of who the characters are and what I appreciate about the books so far. So when I first saw the cover of, the old covers of these books, I wasn't as interested in them. I didn't even recognize that they were sci-fi. I thought they were fantasy retellings. And while that's fine and I enjoy that, I think these are really interesting because they are fairy tale stories set in a sci-fi future, which is really cool. So it's like an imagined Earth in the future. Cinder is a Cinderella story, and she's a cyborg mechanic tasked with the responsibility to fix an android for the prince. So obviously there's some setup there. It's really interesting. And all of this is in the midst of a very deadly plague, which, yes, the timing is interesting, having lived through a pandemic recently. And then on the other side of world events, there is the threat of war from the lunar people who, yes, live on the moon and are a real big threat to all of Earth. There are those kinds of things going on in book 1. And then in Scarlet, it is a Little Red Riding Hood retelling, focusing on Scarlet as she tries to find her grandmother, who has gone missing. Cinder takes place in what is called the Commonwealth, and they live in New Beijing, which is very interesting. And then in Scarlet, she is in France, in a little village, and it takes her to Paris. It's very interesting how the world is kind of united in a different way, and I think that she's mentioned in the books there having been a fourth world war, so interesting. But all of this is, it starts with the character Cinder and it goes on from there, still following her, but also adding in new characters as we go. The next two books are Cress and Winter, and I'm looking forward to reading those. Something I really appreciated from reading this sci-fi YA book, and it's something I could really learn from, was the world building. I really like this world. I like a lot of the stuff that's going on in it, and I found that it was quite palatable and yet rich at the same time. She opens Cinder very nicely with perspectives on Cinder's daily life, and it gives you a clue as to kind of where the world is at, which is really one of the best ways to open up with world building at the beginning of a story. There isn't excessive exposition. There's a lot of she shows this thing, mentions it, and then it's used, so you get an idea of how the world functions, and I think it's really effective. I think it's really smart and very simple, not necessarily easy, but smart, to immerse your character and your reader in the world so that they can get an understanding of things without having to go heavy on exposition, without having to write this high sci-fi, high fantasy story. It doesn't need to be super dense to be rich. And that's something I appreciate about both these books, is I feel familiar with the world and with the vibe of things and the communities they grow up in. They're familiar to me because it is Earth, but I can get the sense of what's changed and what's different. One thing that I really think is interesting is how much their androids are involved in dealing with the plague that they deal with. It's very deadly, so they have to interact with people in the most efficient way, and that's using androids, and that is really nice. It doesn't put any healthcare workers in grave danger, and I just think stuff like that is really interesting. But she doesn't go off on exposition that doesn't have to do with anything, and yet you still get a really good sense of the world, especially because these characters are exploring different and vast parts of the world as they go along. The other thing I've learned a lot from would be the characters. I think that she manages to write characters that seem a little imperfect, even characters you're not sure you can trust, and you get some empathy for a lot of them, and also a sense that they're just human people. And for YA, I think that's incredibly important. It is marketed to a teenage audience, You want the characters to be enjoyable. I think that's high motivation for young people reading books. And when I was younger, I think I would have really loved these characters. I still do, obviously, but I'm a young adult now, going into my mid-20s, and I just, for the most part, didn't feel like anyone was obnoxious. I didn't feel like anyone was flat. Even the Dimensions, there's a particular android that I love. I think she's adorable and has a lot of personality, and you kind of get the sense of these people in just a few sentences and pieces of dialogue, and I think it's really nice. There's some people that you're not sure you can trust, and it's all this, like, it's just these layers that I really like. A lot of these characters have very natural reactions to heavy situations. They're also often selfish. Some of them are even having to overcome programming or instinct to function, to have friends, to get through what they're experiencing. I also thought that the themes and the risks were exciting. They were very personal for the characters and yet very world heavy. And the implications there were cool. Like, I just like that she focused on the right characters. And it wasn't necessarily coincidental that they ended up in these situations. It made sense. It's not like the chosen one thing in the sense that they're just randomly selected or they're randomly focused on, or everyone else was a coward and these characters were brave. It's just that this is the situations they were in that had to do with what was going on with the world at large. And I think it was really cool how that was done. Overall, I think these two have been fun reads. I was surprised by some of the sad or intense moments. I really liked the ending to Scarlet, and it's really propelling me to continue on reading. I'm really excited to go on with the series. I think it works, of course, for the age demographic, but I would recommend this to people who, if you haven't read this series, maybe you miss some of the YA stuff you used to read, like I do. This is worth it. It's worth going back to that age group if you don't normally read YA. YA is for everybody. It's just a marketing label. It's not a genre. You don't have to be a teenager to read YA, of course. It's just more what's marketable about it. And I would agree with that marketing, but I would also say go for it. It's fun sci-fi adaptations of fairy tales. It's done in a way that doesn't feel like it's just like copy and paste with an old story into a newer world. Like, there's a lot of nuance to it, or just creativity of Marissa Meyer's own invention. So I would definitely recommend these. I had a really fun time reading them, and those are some things I learned about world building and characters. You don't need to make it this big, thick, heavy expansion of adult novels to have excellent world building, immersive world building, and realistic and engaging characters. So I'm going to keep reading, and after reading the next two books, I'll give a review of the Chronicles overall. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I've enjoyed reading these, and I hope that you are enjoying whatever you're reading. I'd love to hear about it. Are there any retellings that you like? Any sci-fi worlds that you think are immersive and interesting without being exposition heavy? I'd love to hear about those. Very fun for me. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I will see you again in the future. Bye.